Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Politics Relaxed. It's nice to be back, and we're well within party conference season. So I'm going up to Labour Party conference tomorrow, which I'm very excited about, and hopefully you'll see some results from that quite soon. But today we're talking about Tory Party conference. It was an interesting conference, to say the least. Um, I don't know. Let's get straight into it. I think there's quite a bit to talk about. What do you think the mood of
I
the
think
Tory
say the to say
conference was?
to say the most, it was at least better than last year.
Really? I didn't think
Yeah.
it was.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, way
It
better.
How
felt
can
pretty
you
Better
low
than
how can
last
you
bar.
year.
deny that?
Yeah, yeah, no, oh
Yeah,
no, was it Liz Truss last year?
It was
yeah.
Liz Truss, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, no,
Michael
then it
Gove
probably was.
actively
Yeah,
plotted a rebellion during it.
yeah, yeah, it probably was worse then. But I mean, the standard is really that's a pretty low bar, I think, for what is a good conference.
Well, I thought it was a pretty good conference actually. You know, this was a transformational moment in the premiership of Rishi Sunak. This was a transition from an era of stagnation into an era of hope and glory. So I'm delighted about that, obviously, and I think you see that with Rishi Sunak's speech in particular. It's quite clear that what he's been doing over the last year is stabilising. We had a short while with Liz Truss, total disaster. Before that, Boris Johnson, we had the poly crises, Brexit, COVID, um, all the scandals within that little period. We're way past that now. We're past Liz Truss crashing the economy. We've got a stable prime minister, and now we've got a stable prime minister bringing some vision. And I find that really exciting. I'm sure we'll get onto the details of his speech later.
I think there were two things for me that really stuck out. First of all, in the conference speech, it's very interesting that Rishi Sunak wants to present himself and away from the last 13 years of Tory government. And the way he plans on doing this is implementing these very strange policies that, funnily enough, cost pretty much nothing to the taxpayer or are saving money for the taxpayer. And when I say saving money for the taxpayer, what I really mean is depleting HS2 because the government doesn't really want to complete it and instead announcing a train line which 80% had already been announced. So it's pretty disappointing, I think, for people up north where they were deciding the train line within hotel rooms in HS2 in Manchester rather, over the future of HS2, which I think was pretty ridiculous. And then the smoking stuff, again, fine, pretty uncontroversial. And then, or maybe not, we can probably get into that. But and then the third thing was the A levels, which isn't going to happen. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. And then the other thing I took away from party conference was how divided the Tory party is, how they're a party that looks like they're going to be in opposition within a year's time, and how the right wing of the Tory party is very close to taking over.
I feel, in my opinion, I think it seems as if they're already planning for not the next general election, but the one that will come after that. I do think that the one positive for Rishi Sunak is that there does seem to be a bigger sense of unitedness, or everyone's kind of coming around to support him much larger than it was when he first took charge. But it gives a sense that he's had to kind of radically shift over further towards the right to kind of appease that faction. In terms of like policy, the HS2, I think it massively upsets the North, as you were saying, and it will probably likely keep voters in those particular areas from voting for the Conservative Party. I think the smoking stuff, while not particularly controversial, does carry a significant amount of weight, I think, with the electorate, same as the stuff with transgenderism, which may be beneficial in the end. But at this moment, it's a ticking time bomb for how long the Conservative Party have left in government, because I think, given polling, given by-election results, it's seeming as if they are heading into opposition. So they're now into damage control and planning for, I guess, the next, I'm going to say, like 5 years maybe, until they can try and have another crack of the whip.
I've got to say, I think that is a terrible interpretation of what we've seen this week. No disrespect, but there is absolutely no chance that the Conservative Party are at all considering damage control. This is a
No,
winning
they're damaging themselves even
This is a
more.
winning machine. We've had 13 years of Conservative governments and Conservative victories. And the Conservative Party does not lie down and take a
Yes,
beating.
it does. That's what it's
We
been doing.
no,
all
no,
along.
no. That's totally not true. That this entire party conference was about shaping a vision that the electorate can get behind. You talk about these being cost-free measures, and they may be, but guess why that is? It's because we don't have a lot of money.
Because Liz Truss crashed the economy. At least be honest about it. It's because Liz Truss crashed the economy.
That's not just it. It's just that, during COVID, you look at our government expenditure and the rate that it went up. We spent
Dodgy
a
PPE
lot of
contracts.
money. We borrowed a lot of money, so we can't afford to borrow our way out of another crisis. Which is why we need to look at reallocating the funds that we already have. And let's start by talking about HS2, because obviously that's the key point. The BBC and the mainstream media have jumped on it and they've said, "Oh, Rishi Sunak's cancelled HS2." But look, that's such a simplistic view of what this was. And you talk, by the way, about the North not being happy about this, but HS2 is already not going to the North. You look at Northern MPs, Northern Powerhouse MPs in Teesside, the Teesside Valley Mayor, Ben Houchen, for example. These people were calling for HS2 to be scrapped already. That's the real North. You've got the people in Birmingham who might be complaining. You've got Andy Street. I have a lot of respect for Andy Street, but I think he's wrong about this. When something is failing, you don't continue and try and get it done if it's going to cost so much more. It's already 4 times over budget. It's insane. Who would do that? And we've got this consensus in politics. We've got so many areas of consensus in politics that have just not been challenged. They've just been left to rot. And there's a reason that we're in this place of stagnation that we're currently in. And I'm so happy to see that Rishi Sunak's willing to take this on, because over the past few months, I was seeing what he was doing and I was thinking he was part of the stagnation. No vision, just like Starmer. But this is true vision. What he's bringing to the table here. You can take failing infrastructure projects, because we don't do infrastructure great here in the UK. We need to up our game on that. Scrap that massive big name HS2 for sure. That's what makes the headlines. But all those local infrastructure projects that are going to be improved, the Northern Powerhouse Rail, for instance, this is critical. And the East-West relationship in the North is just as important as the North-South relationship. We shouldn't be telling people, "Oh, come to London for your great jobs." We should be providing them in the North instead. And that's what this government's going to do.
Piers, I know you wanted to come in, so.
Yeah, I think I'll talk about HS2 here, because I think it's a symptom of a broader problem with planning in this country, specifically with planning in infrastructure, because it just takes so long and so much money to plan to plan any major infrastructure project. And it will inevitably go over budgets sometimes, as with HS2, several times over. And we just don't think about these things in a way where they can be sustainably funded and like looked on in a, I guess, rational manner, because the consensus is that infrastructure is good, and it is good, but it needs to be done in a way that isn't just poisonous to the economy. I mean, it's not just like a thing that, because everyone will point to China. They're saying they built this massive super fast train system across the whole country in 20 years. But it's not just China. It works in democracies too. I mean, in Europe, you have high-speed rail, and you've had it for quite some time, actually. And that's something that's been missing in the UK. And I know that the UK is a little bit smaller than some European countries, but it's not substantially smaller, and it certainly has the need, I guess, the need for more developed train systems, certainly that more than they are now. And way to do it sustainably in the current culture. And it's just infuriating for someone who quite likes that sort of infrastructure.
I don't know. I think, I mean, Piers, you're right about infrastructure in this country and how it doesn't work. But the other thing is how this announcement was decided and how it was announced. I mean, first of all, it was a comms disaster from the Conservatives' point of view. You spent days and days and days talking about HS2. Would it be scrapped? Wouldn't it be scrapped? And then you have like Tory MPs and Tory ministers sitting in hotel rooms in Manchester and putting together this really roughshod plan, 80% of which was announced before this conference. So this is not a new plan. This is the vast majority of what was announced is already been announced before. And you have them sitting inside Manchester where HS2 was meant to go. And then they just cobble together this plan without consulting anybody, without consulting Network Rail, without consulting like any of the expert that should be consulted when you're going to try and do infrastructure. It's so frustrating to see. I mean, again, you can talk all day about whether HS2 should or shouldn't have happened in the first place, but the fact that Rishi Sunak is now going to basically curtail any government for the next 50 to 100 years from developing any major infrastructure in this country is extremely, extremely disappointing.
I think we've seen Rishi take a bit of more of a, well, I'll say populist tone, although I don't like using that term as liberally as I've just used it there, because he's no Nigel Farage, but yeah, he has taken a more populist tone. There is a substantial field, I guess, against HS2 as an investment, and some of the other things he's announced are also, I guess, more populist in nature. And I suppose that's sort of a part of his image building that he's been trying to do. Of course, that started with his 5 pledges back in January, although that failed miserably and have not. I don't think have been mentioned recently. They are. I mean, sure, they might still be policy pledges, but they're hardly the PR victory that they set out to be. And yeah, I mean, it's true. The populist tide has not receded. It does still win elections, and we're seeing that in Europe. But I don't know if Rishi can harness that power very well, especially with considering there's still a lot of backlash on the right of the Conservative Party.
I think it was the news agents, I think, that called him a technocratic populist, which I thought was quite a funny kind of
that's interesting
way of putting it.
I do think it's interesting though how you compare him to how he was during the leadership election back in September 2022, that summer period, where I think he tried to frame himself more as the adult voice in the room, and now he's leaning. I wouldn't call him a full populist, but he is leaning certainly into giving off more of those tendencies. I think he had no reason to say, I know what a woman is, a man is a man, and a woman is a woman. That's common sense. But I don't know why he had to say that. But he's obviously playing to that crowd to the right of the party. So there is a sense that he is trying to strengthen his control, which I think is working, but only time will tell as to how effective that will be. And when you say it's like damage control, I don't see how there is a concrete plan for growth right now and how it's sustainable it is. I mean, HS2, cutting HS2 will save money undoubtedly, but where is that money going to go? I want to see that put into local projects, investing into infrastructure, but we need to see that actually happen. Right now, it's just words and all talk. So yeah,
I think there were two things.
If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, we have at least to consider the possibility that we have a small aquatic bird on our hands.
What?
Right? That's the deal with Rishi Sunak. I think that Rishi Sunak, what he is saying is genuine. I think that this is genuinely who he is. I think you look back a year ago, the circumstances we were living in were completely different. His mission as Prime Minister, with the five missions that he set out, for instance, all of which, by the way, are still relevant. They were posted on the wall in the conference hall. They are still front and centre. The thing is that, we're on our way to delivering them. Inflation's already halved. The people coming on the small boats is already down 20% so far compared to this point last year. We're making progress in these key areas. So now it's time for Rishi Sunak to come and lay out a vision. Yes.
You mentioned the word vision, and I think it's interesting because I think this was a conference that distinctly lacked a vision. First of all, I think Rishi Sunak is trying to, again, when it comes to communications, Rishi Sunak is trying to do something that is near impossible. He's trying to say, ignore the last 13 years of complete and utter mess. Ignore all that. I know that was my party that did it. I know I was chancellor for a number of years, but ignore all of that. We are now the party of change, which I think is a really difficult line to take, first of all. And then the second thing is, you look at the conference speech itself, right? And we talk about like rabbits out of the hat. You need some rabbits out of the hat that are going to get everybody excited for your conference so that you can get those like rounds of applause and you can get the media time. And you look at the rabbits that Rishi Sunak brought out of the hat. The first one was his wife announcing him. I mean, that was his first rabbit out of the hat, and really his only one that wasn't pre-announced to the press. If that is really the best that Rishi Sunak has for this country, is getting his wife to announce him on stage, which Gordon Brown did before, was the last person to do it before I think he lost the election the next year, rather ironically. And then the next rabbit was, oh, I can't remember the order of them, but it went the smoking ban, the HS2 announcement, and the A-level announcement. I mean, all of these were known before, and one of them is, like, as I say, is a broad consensus issue across politics, the cigarette one, which will be, I'm sure, supported by the vast majority of MPs. So it's not controversial. It's not really putting any clear blue water between the two parties. So can you call that change? Can you call that vision? No. I mean, the HS2 stuff decided in a hotel days before the conference speech with very little planning. Can you call that like vision and change? Not really, no. The third thing, the A-level stuff, that is not going to, we will not see that put into place.
Yeah,
Michael Gove already tried to do this like many years ago. I think it was originally a David Miliband scheme who introduced it. But it was when Michael Gove came into education, he tried to do something very similar, and it went to nowhere. And then the exact same thing is going to happen with this, right? This is happening in 10 years' time. If we look at the political reality of this, Rishi Sunak is not going to be in Downing Street in 2 years' time, let alone 10 years' time. So for him to announce this policy is kind of like, I don't know, it's like me standing on the street and saying, oh yeah, I would really like the government to do whatever I want. It's like, it's not going to happen. It's fanciful. It's not vision. Those three policies do not represent a wider vision that Rishi Sunak is putting out. If we include the Green announcement in that, still, it's not a wider policy agenda. It's trying to win over votes, and it's trying to save a dying election, an election that the Tories have most likely already lost.
I mean, I just see it so differently to you. Let's start off with the education policy then. So obviously the T levels were established under Boris Johnson, an amazing, great thing. This feels to me like just sorry, that was Trumpian, but a natural advancement from that point. Merging A levels and T levels to the advanced British standard, that seems to me like a critical piece of progress.
I don't like to interrupt you, but can I ask you one simple question? Is this going to happen?
Totally, yeah, I believe it's totally going to happen. Look, if it's not under a Conservative government, it will be under a Labour government. My view is that most of these policies would be replicated by a Labour government under Starmer with no vision of its own. So we probably see this for sure. And I think that's a great thing. You know, this is traditional Labour territory, potentially, the emerging of A-levels and some form of technical qualifications. And look, from my perspective, we need to consider that technical qualifications are really important. We should not be taking the Labour approach and telling people, you know, you should go to university aiming to achieve 50%. There are lots of university degrees out there that are not rewarding in terms of career prospects. And frankly, you know, universities have some agendas of their own. I know because I'm at one. So there you go. But we're also looking at some things that are going to be really positive for teachers and people in the staff at schools. So you're seeing the £30,000 cash bonus. You know, I think the teachers are going to be delighted about that. And then let's talk about smoking as well. I'm a massive fan of this policy. Like, you know, already, you did an amazing job, Felix, on the vaping documentary that viewers should check out if they haven't already. And you know, wasn't it? This is an amazing extension of that, I think, into, you know, the key issue of smoking. which is impacting young people a lot as well as vaping. You know, I'm at university, I see people smoking around campus all the time. I look at it and I think, oh my God, we have to sort this out. And Rishi Sunak has got a plan for that, so that anyone currently aged 14 or younger will never smoke in their lives legally, which I'm absolutely delighted about. We've seen the impact of this in terms of data in other countries when similar measures have been introduced, such as in New Zealand. So I'm delighted by that.
He's not giving something that's really newsworthy or any meat to the voters who are kind of desperate for this plan for massive amounts of growth. I mean, we can talk about the smoking and the education, which I think are brilliant policies, but when it comes down to the crunch, when Labour and the opposition say, oh no, 13 years of this, they've got so much material to get, Rishi Sunak's going to say, oh, we've got hope, we've got policies like smoking, and I just don't think it's enough at the minute. Maybe there'll be something that will come later, but there's no real. When I look at it as someone who's seeing that we're a country that doesn't produce much anymore, we don't make anything, we don't export as much as we used to. There's nothing from the government that gives me much hope in that regard.
He didn't talk about the NHS like in any particular detail. He didn't talk about like the cost of living crisis in any particular detail. He doesn't really have any big bold visions on these things. He doesn't even have any way to solve them. He's just like, right, those exist, but let's talk about smoking instead. Let's talk about XL bullies instead. Like,
and also
really?
saying like making like transgenderism and stuff and saying like, oh yeah, Britain is not a racist country, giving these like sound bites to the public are only appeasing members of his party. I think if we'd all be in his shoes, we'd talk about the economy, plan for growth, stress growth in particular, because back when Rishi Sunak first laid out his 5 points, his vision, I said it sounded like a fantastic idea, but only like implement it. And I think looking at like what the Bank of England is saying in the Office for National Statistics, the economy is only expected to grow marginally by like 0.5%, and that's just not good enough right now. I agree that the cost of living crisis, its peak is probably past. I mean, we're not in 18% like double-digit figures of inflation anymore, but there is still issues to be solved. And by talking about these like weird minor issues that may have public support, but it's not exactly a pressing issue, it gives the sense that the Conservative Party are kind of dodging around stuff and kind of biding their time before they inevitably leave office.
I want to move it on a little bit. I think, I don't know, another thing that was very prominently covered in the media was the influence of the right wing of the Conservative Party on conference. I mean, there were reports that Liz Truss's event was the most hotly attended of all of conference. You had Nigel Farage going around taking selfies with everyone. And you had Suella Braverman talking about what was the latest one? I forgot. What was her new
luxury views?
No. There was another one.
That's what she was talking about. No. That's not what you want to talk about there. No. It's not what you want to talk
luxury
about.
Views.
But luxury views is the important point I took out of her speech.
What was the other one though? There was like, or was it a whirlwind of migrants? It was something like that.
Yes, this is the one the mainstream media want to talk about, isn't it? In the context, it was a hurricane, and it was in the
hurricane. That's it.
Hurricane. It's so important. You've got to contextualize this stuff properly. She was.
You've got to contextualize it.
No, this is ridiculous. I'm just fed up with the headlines that the BBC came up with during this conference, because they don't fairly represent the mood of conference at all, or what people were talking about. The policies that people want to introduce have just been left behind, so they don't matter at all. Look, what Suella Braverman was talking about was the, by the way, completely rightly, the totally exponential growth in the number of boats that we've had crossing the channel. That's undeniable. It's a fact. She was suggesting that while initially it was a gust of wind, now it is a hurricane. That is literally a simile. We love similes.
Thanks, Cameron.
It demonstrates great education. Okay, and she had one at Cambridge, by the way, so she's not stupid. What the more important thing that Suella Braverman was talking about in her speech was this idea of luxury beliefs, And this was a term I thought was extremely interesting because it strikes to the heart of like the privileges that we have, and I'm including myself in this, that made us look at issues like net zero, because everyone wants to solve climate change, right? And then guess what? It has an impact on polling. People get behind it, or ULEZ, for instance, as another example in the by-election. Or apply this idea of luxury beliefs to things like the Rwanda scheme, or issues like the gender ideology, which is very much a luxury belief. Believe me, once again, this is something that academics in university residences are coming up with. This stuff, they've been coming up with it for a very long time. 75 years almost. It's been a highly developed theory that has been left unchallenged. So I think it's good to see someone in the political sphere who's willing to stand up for challenging consensus ideas. And
with that, I think let's wrap it up.
To a close.
Thank you to you all for coming on, as always. Thank you to you for watching the video. I hope we'll have some exciting Labour conference content coming very soon. So stay tuned for that, and yeah, we'll see you very soon. Thank you.